The autumn leaves of 1997 painted the highways of northern Michigan in brilliant shades of amber and crimson, creating a postcard-perfect backdrop for what should have been the Henderson family's dream vacation. Sarah Henderson, 34, had been planning this cross-country road trip for months, carefully mapping out scenic routes from their home in Grand Rapids to the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. Her husband, Mark, their twin daughters Emma and Grace, age 8, and her younger sister Lisa, 26, were all eagerly anticipating 2 weeks of adventure and family bonding. Sarah had always been the organizer, the one who kept detailed itineraries and backup plans. As a high school history teacher, she approached everything with methodical precision, including this trip that was meant to celebrate Mark's promotion at the automotive plant and give the girls memories they'd treasure forever. She had packed emergency supplies, first aid kits, and even printed multiple copies of their route, despite Mark's gentle teasing about her over-preparation. The blue 1995 Ford Explorer was loaded with carefully organized luggage, camping gear, and enough snacks to feed a small army. The morning of October 15, 1997, dawned crisp and clear, with that particular quality of light that makes autumn in Michigan feel magical. Sarah double-checked her lists one final time while Mark loaded the last of their supplies. The twins bounced excitedly in the back seat, already wearing the matching sweatshirts their Aunt Lisa had bought them for the trip. Lisa herself was equally excited. This was her first extended vacation since graduating from college, and she had been looking forward to spending quality time with her sister's family. Before I continue with this gripping story, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you more of these compelling mysteries. Now let's dive deeper into what happened to the Henderson family. The last confirmed sighting of the Henderson family was at a Shell gas station in Traverse City, where surveillance cameras captured Sarah filling up their Explorer while the girls bought candy and Mark stretched his legs. The store clerk, a young woman named Jennifer Martinez, remembered them specifically because Emma had dropped her lollipop and started crying, prompting Sarah to buy her another one with that patient smile mothers perfect over years of practice. Jennifer would later tell police that the family seemed happy and relaxed, with no signs of distress or concern. They were supposed to reach their first planned stop in Marquette by evening, but they never arrived at the lakeside bed and breakfast where Sarah had made reservations 3 months in advance. The innkeeper, Mrs. Eleanor Kowalski, a 60-year-old Polish immigrant who had been running the establishment for over 2 decades, waited until nearly midnight before calling the local police. She was concerned because Sarah had specifically mentioned during their phone conversation that they were traveling with children and wanted to arrive before dark for safety reasons. The initial response from local law enforcement was routine. Families running late on vacation wasn't uncommon, especially with children. But when the Hendersons failed to check in by the following morning and couldn't be reached by phone, concern began to mount. Mrs. Kowalski provided police with Sarah's detailed itinerary, which showed they should have taken Highway 31 north through the scenic coastal route, a journey that should have taken no more than 4 hours in good weather conditions. Mark's brother, Detective James Henderson from the Kent County Sheriff's Office, received the call that would change his life forever on October 17th, when the family had been missing for 2 full days. James immediately took emergency leave and drove north to coordinate with local authorities, bringing with him an intimate knowledge of his brother's habits and personality. He knew Mark was a cautious driver who always stuck to main roads, especially when traveling with his precious cargo of wife, daughters, and sister-in-law. The planned route along Highway 31 was well-traveled and familiar to locals, making the family's disappearance all the more baffling. As the hours stretched into days, the search efforts intensified. The Michigan State Police coordinated with multiple county sheriff's departments to establish roadblocks and checkpoints along all major routes between Traverse City and Marquette. Volunteers from local communities joined professional search teams, combing rest stops, scenic overlooks, and potential breakdown locations. The family's Blue Explorer, with its distinctive Michigan license plate and ski rack, became the focus of one of the largest missing person searches in the state's recent history. The early search efforts were hampered by an unseasonable weather pattern that brought an early snowstorm to the Upper Peninsula, just 2 days after the family's disappearance. Michigan State Police, along with volunteers from multiple counties, had been methodically working their way along Highway 31 and its connecting routes. But the fresh snow covered any potential tire tracks or clues that might have indicated where the Hendersons had deviated from their planned path. Search dogs were deployed to nearby forests when weather conditions permitted, their handlers hoping to pick up any scent trail that might lead to answers. The storm that struck northern Michigan on October 18th was particularly brutal for so early in the season, with temperatures dropping to near zero and winds gusting up to 40 miles per hour. Local weather stations recorded over 18 inches of snow in some areas, effectively shutting down search operations for nearly a week. When teams were finally able to resume their efforts, the landscape had been transformed into a winter wonderland that concealed any evidence the family might have left behind. Detective James Henderson established a command post at the Traverse City Police Station, working around the clock with local investigators to piece together the family's last known movements. Security footage from the Shell station was analyzed frame by frame, revealing that the Hendersons had purchased not just gas and candy, but also a detailed road atlas and what appeared to be a disposable camera. The timestamp on the footage showed they had left the station at 2:47 p.m., giving them plenty of daylight hours to reach their destination under normal circumstances. The investigation revealed several puzzling elements that didn't fit the pattern of a simple breakdown or wrong turn. Cell phone records showed that none of the family members had attempted to make calls after leaving Traverse City, despite Mark carrying one of the early mobile phones that his company had provided. Bank and credit card records showed no activity after their gas station purchase, ruling out the possibility that they had simply decided to change their plans and check into a different hotel. Sarah's mother, Margaret Walsh, a retired librarian with an iron will and sharp intellect, refused to accept that her daughter's family had simply vanished. She took extended leave from her volunteer work and moved temporarily to Traverse City, where she coordinated civilian search efforts and maintained detailed records of every lead and tip that came in. Margaret's organizational skills, honed through decades of library work, proved invaluable in tracking the hundreds of potential sightings and theories that poured in from across the Midwest. The community response was overwhelming. Sarah's colleagues at Jefferson High School organized weekend search expeditions, with teachers and students combing back roads and forest areas that hadn't been officially searched. Mark's co-workers at the automotive plant contributed both money and manpower, organizing systematic searches of hunting trails and logging roads that locals knew but weren't marked on standard maps. The twins' teacher at Brookside Elementary, Mrs. Patricia Donnelly, kept Emma and Grace's desks exactly as they had left them, maintaining hope that the girls would return to finish the school year. Local media coverage brought national attention to the case, with the story appearing on several television programs dedicated to missing persons cases. The publicity generated hundreds of tips from across the country, each one carefully investigated despite the strain on resources. False sightings came in from as far away as California and Florida, with well-meaning witnesses convinced they had seen the distinctive Blue Explorer or recognized the family from their photographs. As autumn turned to winter and then to spring, the active search efforts gradually diminished, though the case remained open and assigned detectives continued to follow up on new leads. The Hendersons' house in Grand Rapids stood empty, maintained by family members who couldn't bear to disturb anything, as if keeping it ready for their return might somehow bring them home. Mark's brother James made the difficult decision to take early retirement in 2001, dedicating himself full-time to pursuing every possible angle in the case. The years that followed brought periodic developments that would briefly reignite hope before leading to dead ends. In 2003, human remains found in a remote area of the Upper Peninsula were initially thought to possibly be connected to the Henderson case, but DNA testing ruled out any connection. In 2007, a witness came forward claiming to have seen a family matching the Hendersons' description at a rest stop in Wisconsin on the day of their disappearance. But investigation revealed the witness had confused dates and was remembering a different family entirely. Technology advances brought new hope to the investigation. As GPS tracking became more common and cell phone coverage expanded throughout rural Michigan, investigators retroactively analyzed coverage maps and tower data from 1997, hoping to find any electronic trace of the family's passage. Unfortunately, the limited technology of the era and the sparse cellular infrastructure in northern Michigan yielded no new information. Detective Henderson, even after his retirement, continued to work the case on his own time, maintaining contact with law enforcement agencies across multiple states and following up on any development that might be connected. He created detailed maps showing every location that had been searched, every tip that had been investigated, and every theory that had been considered. His dedication became legendary among missing persons investigators, who would often cite the Henderson case as an example of how families never give up hope. Margaret Walsh, despite her advancing age, never stopped believing that answers would eventually emerge. She maintained a website dedicated to her daughter's family, regularly updating it with new information and keeping their story alive in the digital age. Her unwavering faith that the truth would eventually surface inspired other families dealing with similar tragedies, and she became an unofficial spokesperson for missing persons advocacy groups throughout Michigan. The breakthrough that would eventually solve the 27-year-old mystery began in the most unexpected way in the spring of 2024. A team of researchers from Michigan State University's forestry program was conducting a comprehensive biodiversity study in the remote Huron National Forest, approximately 40 miles southeast of where the Hendersons were last seen. The research project, funded by a federal grant to study the long-term effects of climate change on Great Lakes forest ecosystems, required detailed mapping of root systems and soil composition throughout the area. Graduate student Kevin Martinez, a 25-year-old pursuing his doctorate in environmental science, was using ground-penetrating radar to study root systems and soil density patterns in an area that had been designated as old-growth forest. The sophisticated equipment, far more advanced than anything available in 1997, could detect subsurface anomalies and variations in soil composition that might indicate historical disturbances or the presence of non-organic materials. On a particularly productive morning in late April, Kevin's equipment detected an unusual metallic signature buried under several inches of accumulated leaf litter and forest debris. The signal was strong enough to suggest a substantial metal object, but its location deep in the wilderness made it an anomaly. The area was miles from any established trails or roads, making it unlikely that the object was simply discarded camping equipment or hunting gear. Dr. Amanda Foster, the team's lead researcher and a professor with over 20 years of experience in forest ecology, was intrigued by Kevin's discovery. Her background included not only forestry science, but also a degree in electrical engineering from her earlier career, giving her the expertise to recognize the significance of what they had found. When they carefully excavated the area around the metallic signature, they unearthed a small, weathered device that Dr. Foster immediately recognized as early GPS logging equipment. The device was severely damaged by years of exposure to Michigan's harsh weather cycles, with its plastic casing cracked and its small LCD screen long since rendered inoperable by moisture and temperature extremes. However, Dr. Foster's engineering background told her that the internal memory chip might still be intact, despite the external damage. GPS units from the mid-1990s were built with robust internal components designed to withstand the rigors of outdoor use, though none were intended to survive decades of burial in a forest environment. The discovery presented an immediate dilemma for the research team. The device was clearly not related to their forestry study, but its presence in such a remote location suggested it might be connected to something significant. Dr. Foster made the decision to contact the Michigan State Police, recognizing that the GPS unit could potentially be evidence in an unsolved case. Her years of academic research had taught her the importance of proper evidence handling and chain of custody procedures. Detective Sarah Chen, a digital forensics specialist with the Michigan State Police, responded to Dr. Foster's call with professional skepticism. In her 15 years of experience, she had seen numerous false leads and potential evidence that ultimately proved irrelevant to ongoing investigations. However, when she examined the GPS device and its location, she began to see connections that hadn't been obvious to the forestry researchers. The area where the device was found was within the general region where the Henderson family had disappeared, though it was far from any of the locations that had been searched during the original investigation. Detective Chen consulted the case files and realized that the GPS unit's vintage matched the time frame of the Henderson disappearance perfectly. Early consumer GPS devices were expensive and relatively rare in 1997, typically owned only by serious outdoor enthusiasts or technology early adopters. The process of recovering data from the 27-year-old device required expertise that wasn't available at the state level. Detective Chen contacted the FBI's Detroit field office, where Special Agent Rebecca Torres had developed a reputation as one of the nation's leading experts in recovering data from damaged and obsolete electronic devices. Agent Torres had previously worked on several high-profile cases involving digital forensics, including cases where crucial evidence had been recovered from devices that other experts had declared irretrievable. Agent Torres approached the GPS recovery project with the methodical precision that had made her reputation. The device's internal memory chip had suffered corrosion and data degradation, but modern recovery techniques that hadn't existed in 1997 offered hope for retrieving at least partial information. Using specialized equipment and recovery software, she began the painstaking process of extracting whatever digital fragments might remain intact. The initial results were frustrating, yielding only corrupted data and partial file fragments that seemed to make no coherent sense. However, Agent Torres recognized patterns in the corruption that suggested the original data structure was still partially intact. Working with computer specialists from the FBI's Quantico laboratory, she developed a custom recovery protocol specifically designed for the obsolete GPS format used by the device. Slowly, over a period of several weeks, fragments of data began to emerge from the damaged memory chip. The information was incomplete and often corrupted, but Agent Torres was able to identify timestamps, coordinate fragments, and what appeared to be a trail of recorded positions. The timestamps, when she was finally able to decode them properly, corresponded exactly to October 1997, the month when the Henderson family had disappeared. The recovered GPS data revealed something that no one had expected. The Henderson family had indeed deviated significantly from their planned route on Highway 31. Instead of following the main highway north toward Marquette, the GPS logs showed a series of turns onto increasingly remote back roads, eventually leading deep into the Huron National Forest via old logging trails that weren't marked on standard road maps available to tourists in 1997. The GPS data reconstruction painted a picture that fundamentally changed everyone's understanding of the Henderson family's disappearance. Agent Torres, working with mapping specialists and historians familiar with northern Michigan's logging history, was able to trace the route recorded by the device through a network of abandoned logging roads that had been used extensively in the early 20th century but were largely forgotten by 1997. These roads were accessible to four-wheel drive vehicles but were not maintained and certainly not marked on any tourist maps. The timestamps indicated that the Henderson family had been driving for hours through the wilderness, far longer than any wrong turn could explain. The GPS logs showed multiple stops of varying durations, with the vehicle sometimes remaining stationary for 30 minutes or more before resuming travel. This pattern was inconsistent with a family simply trying to find their way back to a main road. It suggested either mechanical problems requiring frequent stops or some other factor that was forcing them to travel slowly and carefully through unfamiliar terrain. Detective James Henderson, now 73 but still mentally sharp and deeply invested in solving his brother's case, met with Agent Torres to review the GPS findings. The data confirmed his worst fears. His brother's family hadn't simply gotten lost or suffered a mechanical breakdown on a main road. They had been deep in wilderness that even experienced hunters avoided, traveling on roads that required local knowledge to navigate safely. The most puzzling aspect of the GPS data was what it revealed about the family's final hours. The logs showed that the vehicle had stopped multiple times in a specific area of the forest, with the final recorded position being approximately half a mile from where the GPS device had been found by the forestry researchers. This indicated that someone from the family had walked that considerable distance through dense forest, carrying the device, before it was lost or deliberately concealed. Dr. Foster continued to analyze the discovery site while law enforcement processed the GPS data. Her examination of the vegetation and soil conditions around where the device was found suggested it had been there for decades, buried under natural accumulation of leaves and forest debris. A large oak tree had grown partially around the device's location, its root system indicating the tree had been establishing itself there for at least 20 years. The FBI's involvement brought additional resources to the case, including access to advanced mapping technology and satellite imagery that could help identify the locations indicated by the GPS coordinates. Agent Torres worked with geographic information specialists to create detailed topographical maps showing not only where the Henderson family had traveled, but also the terrain they would have encountered and the challenges they would have faced navigating unfamiliar wilderness roads. When the search team finally organized an expedition to reach the coordinates indicated by the GPS data, they encountered terrain that explained why the area had never been searched during the original investigation. The location was accessible only by following a complex series of logging roads that branched and intersected in ways that could easily confuse even experienced outdoors enthusiasts. Without the precise coordinates provided by the GPS data, finding this specific area would have been nearly impossible. The search team, consisting of Michigan State Police investigators, FBI specialists, and local volunteers familiar with the forest, used modern GPS technology and all-terrain vehicles to navigate the same route the Henderson family had taken 27 years earlier. The journey took over 3 hours, despite having precise coordinates and modern equipment, highlighting just how lost and isolated the family would have been in 1997. When they finally reached the location indicated by the GPS data, the discovery sent shockwaves through everyone involved in the search. In a small clearing, partially concealed by undergrowth and fallen branches accumulated over nearly 3 decades, sat the rusted remains of a blue 1995 Ford Explorer. The vehicle was exactly where the digital trail had led them. Its paint faded to a pale shadow of its original color, and its metal bodywork claimed by years of rust and weather exposure. The sight of the long-lost vehicle brought both relief and renewed grief to Detective Henderson and Margaret Walsh, who had traveled to the site despite her advanced age. After 27 years of wondering and hoping, they finally had physical evidence of what had happened to their family. But the discovery also raised new and disturbing questions about how the Hendersons had ended up in such a remote location and what had ultimately happened to them. Crime scene technicians from the Michigan State Police, accompanied by FBI specialists, carefully processed the vehicle and surrounding area using techniques that hadn't been available during the original investigation in 1997. The Explorer was photographed from every angle before any items were moved, and the surrounding area was mapped and searched with metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar to ensure no evidence was overlooked. The vehicle showed no signs of collision damage or mechanical failure that would explain why the family had stopped in such a remote location. The engine, while severely corroded after decades of exposure, showed no obvious signs of catastrophic failure. The tires, though deteriorated, were still inflated and showed normal wear patterns. This ruled out many of the theories that had been proposed over the years about what might have caused the family to deviate from their planned route. Personal belongings were scattered throughout the Explorer's interior, preserved to varying degrees by the vehicle's enclosed environment. Children's toys, clothing, camping equipment, and food containers were found throughout the passenger compartment. A cooler in the back had long since deteriorated, but its contents suggested the family had been prepared for several days of camping, consistent with their planned itinerary. The arrangement of items inside the vehicle told a story of hasty departure rather than organized camping. Suitcases had been opened and clothes scattered, suggesting the family had been searching for specific items. The girls' backpacks were found in the rear seat, but many of their personal items were missing, indicating they had taken belongings with them when they left the vehicle. The detailed examination of the Explorer's interior revealed crucial evidence that began to piece together the Henderson family's final days. In the glove compartment, investigators found Sarah's purse, still containing her driver's license, credit cards, and a small amount of cash, evidence that ruled out robbery as a motive for whatever had happened to them. Mark's wallet was discovered wedged between the front seats, its contents intact, suggesting the family had left the vehicle in haste rather than as part of a planned camping stop. Most significantly, investigators found a handwritten note tucked into the sun visor, written in Sarah's distinctive teacher's script on a piece of paper torn from one of the road atlases they had purchased at the gas station. The note, though water-damaged and faded, was still partially legible. "If something happens to us, know that we love you all. The girls were brave. Lisa tried to help. We stayed together. Okt 16. The date indicated the family had survived at least one night in the wilderness after their disappearance. The discovery of Sarah's note provided the first direct communication from the family since their disappearance, but it also raised disturbing questions about their circumstances. The formal tone and finality of the message suggested Sarah had been preparing for the worst, yet the reference to the girls being brave and Lisa trying to help indicated they had faced some kind of ongoing crisis that required courage and mutual support. Agent Torres expanded the search area around the vehicle, using the GPS data to identify other locations where the device had recorded extended stops. The pattern of coordinates suggested the family had established at least 2 different campsites during their time in the wilderness, possibly moving to find better shelter or water sources. Modern ground-penetrating radar and metal detection equipment were deployed to search for any evidence of these temporary camps. 3 months after the discovery of the explorer, the expanded search efforts yielded another significant breakthrough. Using drones equipped with thermal imaging cameras and high-resolution photography equipment, search teams began systematically surveying the area within a 5-mile radius of where the vehicle was found. The aerial perspective revealed features and patterns in the forest that weren't visible from ground level, including what appeared to be man-made clearings and structures. Hidden in a ravine approximately 2 miles from the vehicle, partially concealed by a rockfall that geological analysis suggested had occurred years after the original events, search teams discovered evidence of an extensive campsite. The location was strategically chosen, positioned to provide natural windbreak and concealment while remaining accessible to someone familiar with the terrain. Weather-resistant tarps, though deteriorated, were still partially intact and arranged in ways that suggested they had been used to create a substantial shelter. The campsite contained numerous personal items belonging to the Henderson family, preserved by the dry conditions under the rock overhang. Emma's small backpack, with her initials carefully embroidered by her grandmother, was found containing some of her favorite books and a small diary where she had recorded her excitement about the trip. Grace's beloved stuffed elephant, worn from years of love and adventure, was discovered carefully wrapped in what appeared to be one of Lisa's sweaters. Lisa's college ring, a symbol of her recent graduation and bright future, was found near what had been the campsite's fire pit, along with the remnants of camping equipment that wasn't part of the family's original supplies. This suggested they had either found abandoned equipment or had been provided with additional survival gear by someone else. The presence of more sophisticated camping equipment than a tourist family would typically carry indicated that someone with wilderness experience had been involved in their situation. The arrangement and condition of the campsite provided evidence that the Henderson family had survived for an extended period after abandoning their vehicle, possibly several weeks rather than just a few days. The organization of the shelter, the careful positioning of equipment to maximize protection from weather, and the evidence of sustained habitation all pointed to a family that had adapted to wilderness survival with remarkable resourcefulness and determination. Dr. Foster's analysis of the vegetation and geological features around the campsite provided additional insights into the timeline of events. Plant growth patterns and soil analysis indicated the site had been actively used during the autumn of 1997, with evidence of fires, food preparation, and human habitation that matched the Henderson disappearance timeframe. The natural rockfall that had concealed the site was determined to have occurred several years later, effectively hiding the evidence until modern search techniques could locate it. The discovery of the campsite brought both comfort and heartbreak to the families who had searched for answers for nearly 3 decades. Evidence suggested that Sarah's teacher's instincts and organizational skills had served her family well in their fight for survival, while Mark and Lisa had clearly worked together to gather resources and maintain their shelter. The twins, based on the careful preservation of their belongings, had been protected and comforted by the adults who were struggling to keep them safe. Weather records from October 1997 revealed that the family had faced increasingly challenging conditions during their time in the wilderness. After the initial clear weather that had made their departure so promising, the region had experienced a series of cold fronts that brought freezing temperatures, high winds, and eventually the early blizzard that had hampered original search efforts. The family's survival for weeks under these conditions demonstrated remarkable resilience and teamwork. The evidence from both the vehicle and the campsite painted a picture of a family that had not simply gotten lost, but had been placed in an impossible situation that required them to use every resource and skill they possessed. Sarah's note about staying together took on deeper meaning when viewed in the context of their extended survival efforts. They had faced their challenges as a united family, supporting each other through what must have been terrifying and desperate circumstances. The final breakthrough in solving the Henderson family mystery came from the most unexpected source imaginable. Robert "Bobby" Hutchins, a 78-year-old man who had lived as a hermit in the Huron National Forest for over 30 years, was dying of lung cancer in a Traverse City hospital when he saw news coverage of the GPS discovery and the subsequent finding of the Henderson family's vehicle and campsite. The weight of a secret he had carried for 27 years finally became unbearable as he faced his own mortality. Hutchins requested to speak with investigators, leading to a bedside confession that would finally explain how the Henderson family had ended up so far from their intended route. According to his account, he had encountered the Hendersons on October 15, 1997, after their explorer had experienced engine trouble on a remote logging road they had taken to avoid highway construction traffic that wasn't mentioned in their travel guides. The family had been attempting to find their way back to Highway 31 when Hutchins, who knew the forest's maze of logging roads better than anyone, offered to guide them to safety. Hutchins explained that he had been living off the grid for years, sustaining himself through hunting, fishing, and an intimate knowledge of the forest's resources. His intentions had been genuinely helpful when he first encountered the lost family, but his directions, based on outdated knowledge of which roads were still passable, had led them deeper into the wilderness instead of toward civilization. By the time he realized his mistake, darkness was falling and the family was hopelessly lost on roads that hadn't been maintained for decades. The hermit's account revealed that he had initially tried to help the Henderson family establish a temporary camp while they waited for daylight to attempt finding their way out of the forest. His wilderness survival skills had been instrumental in helping them create the sophisticated campsite that investigators had discovered, and he had shared his knowledge of finding water sources and edible plants that might supplement their limited food supplies. According to Hutchins, the situation had become increasingly desperate as days passed, and their attempts to find a way out of the forest failed repeatedly. The complex network of logging roads, many blocked by fallen trees or washed out by years of neglect, created a maze that even his extensive knowledge couldn't navigate with a vehicle carrying a family. Each attempt to drive toward what he believed would be a connection to a main road led to dead ends or impassable terrain. The early blizzard that struck the region on October 18, 1997, had been the decisive factor in the tragedy. Hutchins described how the sudden, severe weather had caught them all unprepared, despite their efforts to stockpile firewood and create adequate shelter. When the storm intensified beyond anything typical for the season, with temperatures dropping far below normal and wind speeds that made maintaining their fire nearly impossible, he had been forced to make an agonizing choice. Faced with the likelihood that none of them would survive if they stayed together, Hutchins had made the decision to retreat to his own well-established shelter, leaving the Henderson family with the best equipment and supplies he could spare. His own survival preparations, developed over years of living in the wilderness, included a reinforced underground shelter that could withstand severe weather but was too small to accommodate 5 additional people. The hermit's confession explained why the GPS device had been found so far from the family's final location. In his panic and overwhelming guilt after the storm passed, Hutchins had returned to check on the Henderson family, only to find their campsite buried under snow and no signs of life. Believing they had somehow managed to escape or had perished in the storm, he had taken the GPS device, possibly thinking it might help explain what had happened if he ever found the courage to contact authorities. Instead of reporting the tragedy, Hutchins had fled deeper into the forest, carrying the weight of his perceived responsibility for the family's fate. The GPS device had become a burden of guilt that he couldn't bear to keep, but couldn't bring himself to turn over to authorities. Eventually, he had buried it in the forest, trying to put the memory of that terrible October behind him, but never succeeding in escaping the knowledge of what his misguided attempt to help had cost 5 innocent lives. Hutchins's confession was corroborated by physical evidence found at both the campsite and vehicle locations, including items that matched his description of equipment he had shared with the family. His detailed knowledge of the area and the specific sequence of events aligned with the forensic evidence and the GPS data in ways that would have been impossible to fabricate. Following the hermit's confession, search teams were able to locate the Henderson family's final resting place in a natural depression surrounded by large granite boulders, approximately 3 miles from their established campsite. The location showed evidence of a final shelter, constructed from branches, tarps, and equipment in a desperate attempt to wait out the unprecedented storm that had struck the region. The forensic evidence at the final site confirmed that the family had fought valiantly for survival, but ultimately succumbed to exposure and hypothermia during the severe weather. The arrangement of the shelter and the positioning of personal belongings suggested that Sarah and Mark had worked until the end to protect the twins, while Lisa had used her youth and strength to help maintain their fire and gather additional materials for windbreak. The recovery of the Henderson family's remains brought closure to one of Michigan's most enduring missing persons cases, but it also highlighted the tragic irony of their fate. A family that had prepared meticulously for their vacation, equipped with modern GPS technology and safety equipment, had been lost not through their own mistakes, but through a well-intentioned attempt to help from someone who knew the wilderness intimately, but had lost touch with the changing infrastructure that made his knowledge obsolete. The Henderson case became a landmark example of how modern technology could breathe new life into cold cases, with the GPS data recovery techniques pioneered by Agent Torres being adopted by law enforcement agencies across the country. The family was finally laid to rest in a ceremony attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by their story, including the researchers whose discovery had made solving the mystery possible. Margaret Walsh, supported by Detective Henderson and surrounded by a community that had never forgotten her daughter, finally achieved the closure she had sought for 27 years. Sarah Henderson was remembered not just as a victim of tragic circumstances, but as a woman whose final acts demonstrated the fierce protective love of a mother and the practical wisdom of an educator who had prepared her family as well as anyone could for an unimaginable challenge.